In 1983, President Ronald Reagan signed Martin Luther King Jr. Day into law. Though celebrated in the black community, it was a highly contentious move that revealed how little America had changed when it came to race relations.
I just feel that there are other black Americans and the corporate body of black Americans who are due honor more than one recent individual about whom there's a great question mark even to this moment.
What is the question mark?
The question mark is that so far all the records on him are sealed.
It had taken nearly 15 years of campaigning by black leaders and activists to honor the slain civil rights leader. In 1981, Stevie Wonder released the single Happy Birthday to honor MLK. Within a year, 6 million petition signatures would be collected by supporters of the proposed holiday and mailed off to Congress, increasing pressure for politicians to give in. Many saw Reagan's choice for what it was, a shallow attempt at appeasing the black community.
The White House staged an impressive ceremony today, the President and Dr. King's widow walking into the Rose Garden together in an effort to spruce up Mr. Reagan's tattered civil rights image. The President signed the bill, which he had so strongly opposed, making Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday a national holiday. And he delivered remarks before some 200 invited guests, which, while not quite calling Dr. King a great American, were designed to honor him.
Reagan had initially opposed the federal holiday proposal, saying it would be too expensive. Other conservative politicians used this line of reasoning, along with claiming that King's alleged association with communists made him unworthy of celebration. The loudest of these voices was North Carolina Senator Jesse Helms, who led a filibuster against the holiday bill and distributed a 300-page packet alleging King's associations with communists. New York Senator and infamous author of the Moynihan Report, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, called Helms's packet filth, threw it on the Senate floor, and stomped on it. Even after becoming federally recognized, states for the rest of the decade dragged their feet about celebrating, with local citizens rejecting state proposals in states like Louisiana and the governor of Arizona abolishing the holiday in 1987. In Virginia, the state decided to lump Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday in with none other than Confederate General Robert E. Lee, and did so until 2000. In Alabama and Mississippi, Robert E. Lee Day is still celebrated on MLK's federal holiday, by the way. While many Americans of the 1980s wrangled with the concept of a federal holiday honoring a black man who never held public office, they were seeing more black people in their politics, in their neighborhoods, and on their screens. That last one especially. One of the biggest sitcoms of the decade was about a black lawyer and doctor couple raising their brood of smart, charming children in a middle-class environment. The biggest artist of the decade was a black, worldwide sensation from Indiana, whose dance moves became legend and whose celebrity endorsement of Pepsi Cola broke records. But a rise of black celebrities and our culture didn't fully translate into a rise of the black condition. What changed? What stayed the same? In this episode of Lexual Does the 80s, we'll be diving into black life in Reagan's America.
Perhaps just once I might use the bathroom by myself.
But there's nowhere that is safe in the city of Los Angeles.
So many legendary black celebrities in the 1980s that it's kind of hard to pick someone to start with. In the sports world, stars like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Magic Johnson, and Michael Jordan were scoring and earning more than athletes ever before. They were recognizable on and off the court.
Over and out.
Wait a minute, I know you. You're Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
On September 15th, Nike created a revolutionary new basketball shoe. On October 18th, the NBA threw them out of the game.
Brands were starting to see black celebrities as valuable. When Coke tried to sign Michael Jackson for $1 million, it thought that doing so would only help it strategically in the ethnic market. MJ rejected the deal and signed with Pepsi instead for $5 million, helping Pepsi revitalize its image as a young and fresh soda company in contrast to old and stuffy Coke. After After Michael was severely burned on a Pepsi commercial set in 1984, he was compensated with an additional $1.5 million, which the King of Pop donated to the hospital where he was treated, establishing a burn center. Though Jackson was the top musical star of the 1980s, other black artists were making a splash, and by that I mean becoming some of the best-selling and widely respected musicians in history. Prince Rogers Nelson, aka Prince, defied expectations of masculinity while starring in and scoring 1984's Purple Rain, earning him an Academy Award and several #1 singles. The album, which for full transparency is one of me and my mama's favorite albums of all time, sold over 13 million copies and spent 24 weeks at #1. That album would be at the center of a controversy we'll come back to in episode 4. In 1984, rock star and icon Tina Turner made a stunning comeback to the world stage with her hit single, What's Love Got to Do With It?, earning her 2 Grammys. She starred in Mad Max Thunderdome, performed in high-profile events and tours that broke records, and released more best-selling songs for the rest of the decade. There was Whitney Houston, whose debut album went #1 for 14 weeks, giving the girls Saving All My Love for You, How Will I Know, and The Greatest Love of All. As a supporter of the anti-apartheid movement, Whitney notably refused to work with agencies who did work with South Africa and performed at the imprisoned Nelson Mandela's 70th birthday celebration in 1988. Whitney's future husband, Bobby Brown, was also making a name for himself as the lead of New Edition before going solo. Along with Teddy Riley of Guy and Bernhard Bell, he would pioneer New Jack Swing, which fused together R&B and hip-hop.
And they sell records, lots of records, even without advertising. Public Enemy, a New York rap group, sold 750,000 copies of their first single in just 6 weeks. That, even though radio stations refused to play their radical political message.
A lot of the cultures are coming together around rap because it's just, I mean, there's so many things you can do with rap music.
I think in the future to be more popular than rock.
Hip-hop was beginning to evolve into several distinct genres, from the brash and playful raps of Run DMC and LL Cool J to the socially conscious lyrics of Public Enemy. We'll be back to that group and another by the end of this episode. Outside the worlds of music and sports, Black Americans also dominated small and big screens. Take Mr. T, who had his own serial and starred on the A-Team, in addition to becoming a spokesman, motivational speaker for children, and Nancy Reagan's personal Santa Claus. I mean, partner for the Just Say No to Drugs campaign, that's what I meant.
Live from New York, it's the Eddie Murphy Show!
It's one hell of a day in my neighborhood. A hell of a day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? I hope I get to move in your neighborhood someday. The problem is when I move in, y'all move away.
Eddie Murphy was on the top of the world, with movies like Beverly Hills Cop and his stand-up specials Delirious and Eddie Murphy Raw making him one of the highest-earning box office stars in Hollywood. When it came to the small screen, there were a number of changes. In 1986, Oprah Winfrey, who pops up a lot throughout this series, was the first black woman with a nationally syndicated show. Black Entertainment Television, aka BET, was founded in 1980, though the amount of original content it provided wouldn't bulk up until the next decade. BET was also not a part of basic cable, so many black people still relied on the big 3 networks, CBS, ABC, and NBC. These networks were throwing things at the wall and seeing what stuck. Some were short-lived gems lost to public memory, like Frank's Place. The 1987 dramedy starred Tim Reed as a professor-turned-restaurant owner in New Orleans. The CBS creation highlighted New Orleans culture, race, and class with a single camera and no laugh track, and appealed to a small but passionate audience.
See this bag?
Yeah.
Which is darker, me or the bag?
You.
Which is darker, you or the bag?
What are you talking about?
The capital C Club? In the old days, Frank, if you were a light-skinned black, you were a Creole. And they spell Creole with a capital C. If you were dark-skinned, it was Creole with a little c. And there was a big difference between the two.
The show was a critic's darling and even received 5 Emmy nominations and won 3. However, an episode titled The King of Wall Street pissed off the network's new owner, Lawrence Tisch, who had made a killing in junk bonds. The show was canceled after just 1 season. Other longer-lived shows that carried bigger audiences were Benson, Different Strokes, 227, Amen, Webster, and latecomers Family Matters and The Arsenio Hall Show. All were dwarfed by The Cosby Show.
Anything out for themselves. It's my barbecue sauce.
Your barbecue sauce.
My barbecue sauce. Haven't you ever noticed after people have some of my barbecue sauce, after a while when it kicks in they get all huggy-buggy?
Oh, stop.
I'm dead serious. Haven't you ever noticed that after one of my barbecues and they have the sauce, people want to get right home?
The Cosby Show ran for 8 seasons and was the most watched show of the 80s, appealing to all races and classes. However, the show's decision to steer clear of race, class, and other heavy issues led to criticism that the show was misleading its white viewers to believe that racism was over. The 1987 spinoff, A Different World, was wildly popular and inspired a generation of kids and teens to attend HBCUs. Thanks to producer Debbie Allen, it explored a plethora of social issues like racism, homelessness, and date rape. The Cosby parents and their children were professional and upper middle class, representing the 21.2% of the black community who qualified for that status. Though their fictional experiences were by no means universal, the depiction of a regular black family enjoying life in comfort rather than simply surviving it reflected the growth that more black Americans had made in the past decade. They lived in considerable numbers in Hamilton Heights of Harlem, Baldwin Hills of Los Angeles, McGregor Park of Houston, Cascade Heights of Atlanta, and Chatham of Chicago. As for the growing group of black celebrities, their success also seemed to suggest that maybe the days of racial inequality were over. The achievements of their private and professional counterparts, aka Buppies, hinted this too. Buppies were usually different than the black middle class because they often came from humble or poor origins instead of money. In 1984, Black Enterprise asked, "Are you a Buppie? No? Wanna bet?" It went on to humorously describe Buppies as ambitious wealth seekers who watched movies with subtitles and preferred sushi over soul food, unless the fried chicken and collards are served in restaurants where the tab for 2 would have fed a family of 4 for a week when they were kids. It ended by saying, "Aspiring for the finer things in life is wonderful. We need more folks who know that squash is not just a vegetable." Political analysts of the time theorized that Buppies were the new group to court, citing their key role in the election of various black mayors. Published the LA Times in 1985, they're more politically active, more critical of traditional black leaders, more distrustful of whites in general, and, most importantly, more likely than other blacks to vote. A 1988 Ebony magazine article delved further into the contrasting worlds of these rich blacks and their rich white counterparts, writing, "Nowadays, the black rich live right along the white rich in the luxury co-ops and condos of New York and Chicago, and in the best neighborhoods in Houston, Minneapolis, and Malibu. They buy their Brioni and Chanel suits in the same stores, sip Vichy water and Sancerre in the same private clubs, and have the same stockbrokers." One millionaire quoted in the article, Dempsey J. Travis, hinted that it was all smoke and mirrors. "I've studied this thing for years, and I can tell you the blacks with money may travel in the same direction as whites with money, but we're never a real part of them. You may even have more money than they have, but in most cases, you're just a rich, lucky black. You're different, and they never let you forget it." Said Thomas E. Kavanaugh, "There is a deep feeling that their position is precarious, that it could all be taken from them tomorrow." The growing media status of talented black Americans, along with the achievements of the black middle and upper classes, obscured a pernicious reality bubbling underneath the surface. On television, kiddos were treated to mid-century reruns of Tom and Jerry, featuring the racist character Mammy Two Shoes. TV stations ignored civil rights groups who complained. White people, like future Virginia Governor Ralph Northam, could slather shoe polish on their faces and claim to be imitating Michael Jackson without much trouble. Blackface was pretty popular that decade, worn by comedians like Dan Aykroyd in Trading Places.
I certainly hope there's enough space on the train for me.
And C.C. Thomas Howell in 1986's Soul Man, a comedy poking fun at affirmative action.
These are the 80s, man. It's the Cosby decade.
For Mark Watson, all it took was a little soul.
I'd like you to meet my good friend, Kareem Abdul-Ali.
While there were celebrations of shiny, glamorous, and talented black people who offered entertainment value in the mainstream, the representation and treatment of average black Americans in the 80s left much to be desired.
Daddy, tell me, where did the people who come from who were shouting, "Nigger, go home"? They came from where?
Yes, ma'am. They came from, my name's Frank Shirley. I'm the head of the committee to keep Forsyth and Dawson County white.
Forsyth County had driven out its population of roughly 1,100 black citizens back during a 2-month period in 1912 and remained one of many sundown towns that existed without backlash into the 80s. Well, that is until 1987. Forsyth County had grown from just 27,500 people to approximately 40,000, with the county seat being Cummings. Over 30 new industries had arrived to the county, which reaped the benefits of being in the growing Sun Belt. Atlanta suburbs were expanding, spilling over into the mostly lily-white area and arousing the usual hatred. While black people worked there, they did not live there. Forsyth, however, was noted for having a small group of Koreans, Latinos, Cambodians, and an Egyptian family. For local whites, that was diverse enough. On January 17th, 75 people, including Georgia State Representative J.E. Billy McKinney and Atlanta City Council member Hosea Williams, tried to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. Day with a march through Forsyth, organized by a white karate instructor named Dean Carter. In a continuation of centuries of white mob violence, these peaceful gatherers were confronted and assaulted by over 400 white people, including Klan members. They were hit with slurs as well as stones and bottles.
The marchers were clearly outnumbered by their antagonists who lined the road in a scene that looked like something out of America's darker past. Forsyth County's been all white for decades, and many residents say they want to keep it that way.
We haven't had none up here since the first of the century, and I don't think we've done okay without them, and I don't believe we need them up here now.
The organizer, Dean Carter, reflected on the day's events.
I thank God that I did not bring my wife and 2 children today. Now this is ridiculously sick.
Listen.
To have all this go on in America and people not stand up against it.
After peaceful marchers got back onto their buses to leave, the Klan had a rally on the Cummings Courthouse Square where a permanent sign read, "Don't let the sun set on you" in Forsyth County. Not to be deterred, a week later, over 20,000 protesters gathered for the Brotherhood March. Marchers included Atlanta Mayor Andrew Young, Jesse Jackson, who pops up like a unicorn at every event in the 1980s, the comedian Dick Gregory, former Colorado Senator and presidential candidate Gary Hart, and Coretta Scott King. The civil rights family has not been together like this since we buried Martin Luther King, Hosea Williams told reporters. The march brought together the other side too. Roughly 1,700 National Guard troops and other law enforcement agencies were on hand for the 2,000 Klan members and sympathizers. One paper quoted a sympathizer thusly, "We don't want the corrupted minorities taking over our town." The man had lived in Atlanta outskirts with his family until 1983 and said he moved to Cumming to get away from poverty and corruption. The paper went on, he believes that blacks would bring to Forsyth County their crime rate, AIDS, and everything else.
And this is a white county. I think they should stay out of here, period, because we don't want them up here. It's not that I hate them. I don't hate niggers. I just want them to stay out of this county.
Also on the scene was former Klan resurgence artist and founder of the new National Association for the Advancement of White People, David Duke, who was arrested for reckless conduct. For the $55 fine he faced, he raised $19,000 in legal fees and was featured on all 3 major news shows, poising himself for more political battles in the future. Over 60 other people were arrested before and during the march, most being Klan members. Oprah came to investigate, holding a town forum-style show with one catch. The discussion would only be open to white participants. Not all residents of Forsyth were opposed to black residents, but the overwhelming majority were. So back in 1984, a wrongful death lawsuit was filed against the United Klans of America over the lynching of Michael Donald in 1981. The 19-year-old college student was walking from a store in Mobile, Alabama when he was abducted by 2 members of the United Klans of America. They were angry over the acquittal of a black man on trial for the murder of a Birmingham police officer and selected Michael Michael at random before hanging him from a tree. Local police blamed a drug deal gone wrong, though his mother refuted the idea that Michael did drugs. It took not one, but two investigations by the FBI at the insistence of two black brothers on the political scene, Thomas and Michael Figures, before the two Klansmen and their accomplices were arrested in 1983. Everyone, except the man who died before his retrial, were jailed and convicted, and the leader was put on death row. In 1987, Michael Donald's mother, Beulah Mae Donald, won a $7 million verdict in a lawsuit against the Klan chapter, which was also responsible for the beating of freedom riders in 1961 and Birmingham's infamous 1963 church bombing. The United Klans of America settled the suit when it sold its modest $52,000 national headquarters, virtually bankrupting the group. With this successful lawsuit in mind, Hosea Williams and J.E. Billy McKinney filed their own, charging that two Georgia Klan chapters had conspired to deprive them of their civil rights during the first march. Towards the end of the trial, Hosea Williams dropped out of the suit and also urged for the suit to be dropped altogether, saying it would just impoverish the families of KKK members and entrench racial hatred, directly telling papers it is not going to accomplish very much for the civil rights movement. Despite his trepidation, the two Klan groups were ordered to pay nearly $1 million by a jury of 6 in 1988. Meanwhile, was Forsyth County changing? Descendants of black property owners who were forced out back in 1912 felt confident enough to request the land be restored to them, which was denied. Meanwhile, residents complained about their national reputation as backward racist. Reported one paper, a school weightlifting team competing in Syracuse, New York, was harassed to the extent that school officials decided to cover up Forsyth County on the school bus and discard the school t-shirts. Local businessmen and politicians worried about industries refusing to do business in the area.
But it appears tonight Forsyth's past is haunting its future. One of the fastest growing counties in the state has seen its image severely tarnished. Image means jobs. And according to one commissioner, what happened over the weekend has already slowed Forsyth's economic momentum.
So, the governor established a Coming Forsyth County Biracial Committee, which was to assess the events and offer solutions moving forward. The committee was made up of 6 white residents and 6 black appointees. What could go wrong? Predictably, both groups came to opposing conclusions about what had transpired, with the white committee basically saying civil rights leaders were partially to blame. The committee was dissolved less than a year after being created, and by 1990, only 14 black people lived in Forsyth County. For the time being, the Klan and its sympathizers effectively kept black people out of Forsyth, but preventing black migration wasn't the only thing that motivated Klan members in the 80s. On April 19, 1980 in Chattanooga, Tennessee, 4 black women were leaving the Whole Note Lounge on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard and shot at by 3 Klan members. The 2 shotgun blasts also injured a 5th woman standing nearby when flying glass exploded. The women were Viola Ellison, Leela Mae Evans, Catherine O. Johnson, Opal Lee Jackson, and Mary Tyson. All survived. An all-white jury acquitted 2 of the accused men of attempted murder and gave the third a 9-month sentence and $225 fine, of which he served 3 months. The acquittals led to 4 nights of rioting in Chattanooga, a city that had a population of 170,000, 35% of whom were black. For decades, they had been terrorized by the KKK, in addition to worsening economic conditions. During the riots, 9 cops were shot or injured, and by day 3, civil rights leaders and clergy volunteered to stand in for police in hopes of avoiding more violence. "We don't want the police to have an excuse to come in here trigger happy," said Jesse Jackson. In the aftermath of the violence, the injured women went on to file a lawsuit, the first case to sue the KKK based on the Anti-KKK Act passed in 1871. The women won a judgment of $535,000, but were never actually paid. The 3 Klansmen disappeared from public record. This case inspired future litigation against the Klan, but of course, Klan violence has never been the only threat to black life in America. For black residents of Miami, the decade of black tragedy started with the December 17, 1979 murder of 33-year-old insurance salesman Arthur McDuffie. McDuffie, who had several traffic citations and a suspended license, was stopped by police while riding his Kawasaki motorcycle. The cops then beat McDuffie to death and claimed that the former Marine Corps Lance Corporal led them on a high-speed chase and got into an accident, even driving a car over his bike to back up their fraudulent story. All the cops were unsurprisingly acquitted in May 1980 despite clear evidence, leading to massive riots of over 4,000 people during the span of 3 days. The governor called for 500 National Guard troops on day 1, but the riots continued. By day 3, in addition to 2,500 more National Guard troops roaming the streets, there was a temporary ban on sales of liquor and firearms and a citywide curfew.
Residents of one neighborhood said that during the peak of the rioting Sunday night, they watched in amazement as a group of city policemen vandalized more than a dozen automobiles in a parking lot, smashing windows with billy clubs and rifles, then spray painting the cars.
By the time the dust settled, there was over $100 million in property damage. 787 people were arrested, 370 people were hurt, and 18 people died. Some by accident, but a few were murders, including 3 men dragged out of their car on the way home from a fishing trip and a black man who was shot and killed in the chest by a white man in a passing pickup truck. The federal government declared Miami a disaster zone, gave the city funds to rebuild, and the Miami Police Union successfully threatened the city into reinstating the 5 officers who murdered Arthur McDuffie. While the treatment of black people at the hands of cops would continue to be swept under the rug until a certain event in the early 90s, violence on every level was happening against black Americans. 1980 was also the year that Joseph Gerard Christopher, a 25-year-old New Yorker, went on a murder spree in Buffalo from September to December, killing over 12 black men and nearly killing 7 others. The victims were 14 to 71 years in age. Christopher was a racist, paranoid schizophrenic who had tried checking himself into a psychiatric center shortly before the killings began, but staff, dealing with a strapped, downsizing budget, told him he wasn't a danger to himself or others. This nexus of racism, mental health, and deinstitutionalization will come back up in episode 6. New York itself was the scene of a lot of racial violence during the decade. The city saw 3 high-profile mob cases no different than lynchings. In 1982, MTA maintenance man Willie Turks was dragged from his car and beaten to death near Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn, and his 2 co-workers barely escaped with their lives. The perpetrators were over a dozen white men in their teens and early 20s. The ringleader, an 18-year-old weightlifter named Gino Bova, was convicted of second-degree murder by a jury of 11 white people and 1 Latino. The judge at his sentencing remarked, "It was a lynch mob on Avenue X that night. The only thing missing was a rope and a tree," before giving Bova the maximum 5 to 15-year sentence, of which he served 8. In Queens, New York in 1986, 23-year-old Trinidadian construction worker Michael Griffith and his friends traveled from Brooklyn to Howard Beach to pick up paychecks. Their car broke down. Walking roughly 3 miles to find a payphone and some food, they were met by a pack of over a dozen teenage and young adult racists. Michael was chased by a mob of white teens who beat him and his friends with baseball bats and tire irons. Fleeing from the mob onto the nearby highway, Michael was fatally hit by a car. The 17-year-old British teen who led the mob, John Lester, was convicted of second-degree murder and given 10 to 30 years, ultimately serving 13. 2 others were convicted and served 10 to 14 years apiece. The driver, who was alleged to be connected to the mob but the son of a cop, was cleared of any wrongdoing. Just 3 years later, another mob of white teens would murder a black person, this time much more directly. Yusuf Hawkins was 16 years old when he and his brother and 2 friends went to the largely Italian-American Brooklyn neighborhood of Bensonhurst. Bensonhurst was filled with recent immigrants, many from Sicily and southern Italy. Yusuf and friends were there to check out a $900 1982 Pontiac they saw listed in the classifieds. Little did Hawkins and his friends know that a mob of white teens were laying in wait to attack black men that were rumored to be attending a white girl's birthday party that night. Yusuf was beaten to death, and one of his friends who had also been beaten was detained by police for several hours without medical attention. Wrote Garrett McGrath, 3 days after Yusuf Hawkins' death, 300 black demonstrators marched through the streets of Bensonhurst. Neighborhood residents cursed and spat upon the protesters, hitting them with food. Some locals held watermelons.
In the aftermath of the killing, racial tensions in Bensonhurst and New York City have mounted. Local marches organized by civil rights groups have drawn anger from the community.
Why should the whole community be indicted and maligned and called racist for the acts of one individual? These people are good people. This is a good community, and there are not racists in this community.
This is not racist community. We just don't like black people. That's all.
My son will never turn this corner again.
No, he won't.
Only because of this, the pigment of his skin. Do you understand that? This is what America must learn. that we are no longer going to take this.
Multiple murderers of Yusuf were arrested and jailed lightly, with only 2 receiving hard time, leading to protests in the early 90s. Murders like these were just a reminder to those wrapped up in a Cosby Show fantasy of what the black experience meant in America. These 3 high-profile cases were in New York, a step away from Cosby's Brooklyn, and not in the Confederate-loving South, which was seeing a reverse migration trend of 355,000 new black residents from 1985 through 1989 in Atlanta, Virginia Beach, and Charlotte. When the subway vigilante Bernhard Goetz shot 4 young black men on a New York subway train in 1984, there were 3 main groups of people debating the issue. There were those who believed the 4 men's version, that the 18 to 19-year-olds were panhandling and that a racist white man had shot them. There were others who believed Goetz's version, that the men, 3 of whom had prior criminal convictions, were part of a growing crime culture of theft and assault, and had tried to rob Goetz. That camp was split between those who thought Goetz overreacted when he used his unlicensed gun,
and him taking a vigilante type response to crime in the city leads other people to feel that they can do it too. It can be harmful to all of us.
and those who thought Goetz was justified in the shooting.
I think he was, protecting himself. This is around the Christmas holiday. You gotta look out for yourself.
I think he did right. I really do. Because somebody's got to do something, and the police aren't always there.
What do you think about the fact that he's come back to New York? Do you feel he's coming back as a criminal?
I think he's a good man. I think he's a good man. He wants to show the public, look, I did it, and I'll pay the price, but I had to defend my life at that instance, in that moment.
He's totally, violated some rules and regulations, but at the same time, I have a feeling, he did something right.
Goetz was just one of several people who took matters into their own hands, but his was the most high profile.
Angry and hopeless, some citizens have taken the law into their own hands. A vigilante backlash against crime.
Okay, let's get it up.
In Miami, crack houses have become the targets of arsonists. Recently, 4 suspected crack parlors were destroyed within a 10-hour period. Earlier this month in New York City, several people were arrested for beating a purse snatcher to death. They say their neighborhood has been plagued by a series of drug-related crimes. In Detroit, 2 men were charged with arson after they burned down this house. Butch Parisi and his neighbor, Perry Kent, say they took drastic measures to get rid of a nest of crack dealers.
A New York volunteer patrol group, largely made up of black and Latino teens called the Guardian Angels, collected money towards Goetz's legal defense fund. The Guardian Angels had been founded in 1979 for the purpose of self-policing the city's subway systems in the face of rising assaults and robberies. An ongoing problem since the 70s was chain snatching, with one 1986 article describing a 37-year-old Bronx man who was dragged to death by a car when he tried to get his chain back from thieves. This was just one of several fatalities, and the fear of having your chain snatched would become a regional joke.
A jury of your peers has found you guilty of chain snatching. I sentence you to death by electric chair.
Boy, I should beat the links over you. You better take him to the chair.
Objections to these kinds of crimes created support for Bernhard Goetz, who was eventually cleared of major charges and only served 8 months for illegal weapons possession. Roy Ennis, the director of the Congress of Racial Equality, had lost 2 of his sons to gun violence, and the group threw its support behind Goetz and the right of private citizens to carry a concealed weapon. The Reverend Al Sharpton and others called Goetz a racist. It was revealed in 1985 by one of the 4 men, Daryl Cabey, that the group had intended to rob Goetz. Another, James Ramsey, would end up in prison for raping a pregnant woman in 1986. Another, Barry Allen, ended up robbing a 58-year-old a few years later. The intra-community disagreement over whether Goetz was racist and how the 4 would-be robbers should have been treated would continue in other arguments about how to handle crime in the black community. In a February 1982 poll, 30% of respondents thought the government was paying too much attention to blacks and other minority groups. Reagan's strategy to deal with black people was simple: not be overtly racist, but still let the racist know he was nobody's liberal. It was no secret that at least 70% of black people disapproved of Reagan, while less than 20% of whites did. While vowing he would be committed to equality, he also said he would reverse affirmative action programs that would become quota systems. While paying lip service to equality, he supported racist schools like like Bob Jones University, who didn't want to be taxed for staying segregated. And when 1965's Voting Rights Act was set to expire in August 1982, Democrats proposed effects tests that would judge nationwide discrimination in voting, and Reagan opposed it. In 1980, he had called the Voting Rights Act humiliating to the South and tried to weaken it, but after intense lobbying and backlash, he eventually extended the law. He also vetoed the Civil Rights Restoration Act in 1987, which specified that receivers of federal funds must comply with the civil rights law in all areas, not just in programs that get the funding. Thankfully, this was overridden by a Democrat-led Congress. Then, of course, there was the war on drugs, which incentivized and facilitated the mass incarceration of black men. All the while, Reagan insisted he wasn't a racist and won support, cosigns, or celeb PR moments with well-known black Americans, from Muhammad Ali to Michael Jackson. Muhammad Ali in particular had endorsed Reagan for his 1984 re-election because he wanted to keep God in schools by bringing back school prayer. Black conservatives had always been around, but they gained more visibility during the Reagan years, endorsing trickle-down economics, calling for harsh sentencing laws, and/or opposing affirmative action. The differences among black people were all over the place, by the way. In a 1985 Black Enterprise survey of 2,000 middle-class and Buppie readers, results showed that when asked about who they supported in the Palestine versus Israel conflict, 57.8% said neither, and 29.6% said they supported Palestinians. When asked if American businesses should divest from South Africa to kill apartheid, 20% said no. When asked if black people should form their own political party, 66.8% said no. When asked if they believed was there a difference between the Democrats and Republicans, 61.5% said yes. Another 60% said the women's liberation movement, which improved birth control, divorce, financial access, etc., was not significant for black women. And 70% said that white women, many new to the workforce, were taking black jobs. Nearly 72% of respondents said racism in America was as prevalent in 1980 as it was 10 years ago. A 1985 cold call survey of 1,200 black people that Ebony titled, "What Do Black People Want?" offers more insight. The three most pressing problems mentioned were unemployment, education, and racism/racial conflict. Housing and crime rounded out the top 5. When asked what would be the best way to reduce crime, 36% said better supervision of children by parents, and 33% said more jobs. A combined 20% called for more police on duty, longer jail sentences, and using the death penalty. 6% called for prohibiting handguns. 53% of respondents said the number of unmarried mothers worried them a lot. Furthermore, 24% of the participants didn't care about apartheid in South Africa or race relations in America. 75% called Jesse Jackson the most influential black leader. 1% admired Louis Farrakhan. 71% said the government should be spending more on the war on drugs. And nobody said anything about HIV or healthcare. Fighting white supremacy, both the old kind and the new, sneakier kind, and making the world a better place meant different things to different types of black people. The chasm between black Americans who voted Democrat or Republican was growing wider. There were older black people who were committed to Republicans even after the platform switch that drove white racist Dixiecrats into the GOP. And many were as religious as they were loyal. Then, of course, there were black people of all ages who wanted influence and power in a clearly conservative nation. Said one fashion show producer Republican in 1984, "It's nice to know that you can get on the phone and call the vice president or Barbara Bush and that they'll return the call." Everyone wanted different things. What were the priorities? Return phone calls, jobs, immigration? As discussed in earlier episodes, there were over 8.3 million immigrants during the decade, some documented, some not. About 25,000 Haitian refugees arrived with approximately 125,000 Cubans after Castro opened the port of Mariel. Called boat people, the Haitians had been arriving since the early 70s, fleeing from their country's dictatorship. Though the Haitian dictatorship was very cruel, it was one of America's anti-communist allies, meaning the government didn't want to alienate it. So America labeled the Haitian boat people as economic migrants rather than political refugees, making them ineligible to receive asylum. The Carter administration beefed up its program of detaining migrants, which had been in the past a last resort. During the Mariel boat lift, Reagan decided to send a message to future asylum seekers. Beginning in May 1981, all undocumented Haitians were detained without the possibility of bond. Observers criticized the treatment of Haitians and other black immigrants versus the treatment of Cubans. Published Ebony magazine, thousands of blacks from Haiti, from Ethiopia, from South Africa, from all over, who escaped terror, poverty, and incarceration in their homeland, only to find prison-like detention camps and harassment in the United States. By 1982, there were nearly 2,000 Haitians held in detention camps, jails, and prisons in 6 states. Haitians inside and outside of the detention camps protested the treatment of refugees several times, including in September 1981 when hundreds of them started a hunger strike, rioted, and some escaped into Miami. Most were apprehended. In 1982, all of the refugees were ordered to be let go by a federal court, which also ordered a return to paroling refugees. The Reagan administration decided to fight against accusations of being racist towards Haitians by expanding the detention program to include the jailing of all aliens, including the flow of Central Americans we discussed in episode 1. Though there was a solid group of pro-immigration supporters in the black community, especially when it came to black ones, combination of xenophobia and fear of crime meant widespread support of anti-immigration legislation among certain groups of Americans, including black people who were nervous about a shrinking population of those who descended from the enslaved. At the start of the decade, there were 816,000 total black immigrants from Jamaica, Haiti, Nigeria, and more, in addition to their 27 million black American brothers and sisters. And by 1990, there were over 1.4 million total black immigrants, and even more in other racial groups. Ebony magazine used census data to predict it is quite possible that the Hispanic population in the U.S. will surpass the black population within 35 years. Some native black Americans were disgruntled and felt marginalized when it came to job opportunities and policy priorities, a trend at various points in America's past. And in the 80s, black politicians in areas seeing rapid Hispanic population growth feared a loss of power. When members of the Congressional Black Caucus were given the opportunity to vote on what would become the Immigration and Reform Act of 1986, the black members who voted against it came from districts with substantial amounts of Hispanic constituents. The bill would legalize the status of Cubans and Haitians whose cases had been pending. In 1980, the National Black Independent Party attracted around 2,000 delegates to its founding convention. Attendees strategized on how to work within the electoral arena, and its charter and constitution called for equal gender representation. The party lasted for 6 years. Even while being established as an alternative party, they pushed Harold Washington's 1983 bid for Chicago mayor and Jesse Jackson's 1984 presidential bid. During the last episode, we discussed Jesse Jackson's historic run for the presidency in 1984. He would take another stab at the job in 1988. He stunned the nation when he won the Michigan caucus with 55% of the 200,000 votes cast, double the amount for Michael Dukakis. Why can't Jesse be nominated? Newspapers asked during the 1988 primaries. One of his standout proposals was reprioritizing the war on drugs to focus on suppliers of drugs rather than punishing users with mandatory minimum sentences. Jesse Jackson didn't win the Democratic nomination. The nation had just seen its first black governor, Douglas Wilder of Virginia, in 1985.
As governor of Virginia.
As governor of Virginia.
Retired Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell administered the oath of office, and Douglas Wilder, grandson of slaves, became the first black elected governor of an American state ever.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
In no way was the country ready for a black president, but Jesse was still a popular figure in the Democratic Party.
Fasten your seatbelts. Jesse Jackson has arrived to deliver the most widely anticipated speech of this convention. Even though he is not the presidential nominee, he is clearly the most gifted orator in the Democratic Party today. In the words of no less than Richard Nixon, who does not necessarily admire him ideologically, he says of Reverend Jackson, he's the only real poet in American politics today, and he does know how to deal with a crowd like this.
Wrote one observer, no one who has seen the white hands of farmers and the elderly straining to touch Jackson could doubt that his campaign would leave the country less racist than it found it, adding that Jackson may have to settle for being the one on whose shoulders others stand to climb through. In the meantime, the country was seeing a lot of black mayors. At the end of the 70s, over 200 cities had voted in black Democrat mayors who inherited a lot of problems, and more would follow. For starters, conservatism was a dominant ideology ideology in many areas, meaning a rejection of programs and policy proposals that seemed too radical, liberal, and soft-hearted. The demise of well-paying jobs from deindustrialization meant new expectations to help formerly employed people find housing and jobs, and resist the lure of drugs, which seemed to be flooding the streets. By 1987, the black unemployment rate was double that of whites. Liberals and leftists wanted social spending, but there was a declining taxpayer appetite for social spending, meaning that implementing too many programs and raising taxes, especially if those programs would help minorities, was treated with hostility. As Bradford Martin wrote in the other 80s, these black mayors needed to figure out how to leverage jobs and services to improve the lives of the poor and minority citizens from the pro-growth business community that represented the best hope for economic revitalization in an age of declining public investment. Shrinking tax revenue from white flight meant these mayors turned to whoever was willing to give money, like real estate developers and investors who wanted to build downtown financial centers. This was the case for Tom Bradley of LA, a former cop who developed the downtown business district at the expense of poor communities whose jobs had dried up when rubber and steel plants shut down. So it was black mayors shouldering the consequences of deindustrialization, as well as the devolution tactics used by Nixon and Reagan, needing the approval of moneyed private citizens to provide what should have been basic public services. Also, while white mayors didn't have to worry about appearing to be fair to all races, black mayors did, and were often criticized and challenged for trying to make up for years of inequity. Take Harold Washington of Chicago, whose 1983 mayoral campaign was about self-determination and community control. He had originally come to prominence as an Illinois state representative, expected to stick to the party script until he supported legislation addressing police brutality in Mayor Richard Daley's Chicago. The city was notoriously run by a Democratic machine built on patronage and party loyalty, so speaking against the mayor of his party lost him internal political clout. Washington wasn't radical, perhaps demonstrated by his silence on the assassination of Fred Hampton in 1968, but his commitment to mainstream black causes, like championing the first Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, made him an attractive local politician. He made an unsuccessful mayoral run in 1977 before successfully running for the House of Representatives in 1980. Away from the small Chicago machine on Capitol Hill, Washington was vocal in supporting a nuclear freeze and diverting 20% of the defense budget to social and urban programs, along with opposing Reagan's foreign policy in Central America. So, during the 1983 Chicago mayoral race, Washington was elected with only 36% of the vote. However, though 80% of Chicago's citizens were Democrats, Washington won with only 52% of their vote, which broke down to 99% of the black vote and 12% of the white vote. Most of those white voters were lakefront liberals, while white working and middle-class voters had split between the two white candidates, benefiting Washington but revealing the lack of enthusiasm for the city's first black mayor. Said one white Democratic boss ahead of the primary, "It's a racial thing. Don't kid yourself. I'm calling on you to save your city, to save your precinct. We're fighting to keep the city the way it is." Washington spent most of his first term facing intense opposition from racist white Democrats loyal to Daley and the old Chicago machine. Nevertheless, Washington instilled black people in key leadership positions, passed a Tenants' Bill of Rights, limited campaign contributions for companies holding city contracts in an attempt to break up the long-entrenched political machine, and ended politically motivated hirings and firings. All of this he did in his first 3 years, and it was essentially him getting a working majority so he could disassemble the machine that had generational effects on black citizens. To some black Chicagoans, Washington wasn't dedicated enough to black causes. To whites, he gave preferential treatment to black people. Despite this, Washington was re-elected in 1987. He set to work changing the way that community development block grants were dispersed to the community. Before, a machine-appointed bureaucracy dispensed funds at its discretion, but Washington rerouted federal funds directly to the communities and enhanced the power of non-governmental organizations to participate in decision-making. Improvements to housing, along with community-based strategies to improve education, were at the top of Washington's agenda when he unfortunately died of a heart attack 9 months after his re-election. Other notable mayors include civil rights leader Andrew Young in Atlanta, who in 1981 ran for mayor after many people insisted he do so, like Coretta Scott King. He continued Maynard Jackson's programs for including minority and female-owned businesses in city contracts, while also bringing in $70 billion in new private private investment and handing out more college scholarships. Like many urban areas, Atlanta was seeing a surge of homelessness, particularly due to a decline in the availability of single-room occupancy housing. After 17 homeless men died in 1981 from exposure to the cold, Young helped create a homeless task force and shelter. But check this. He was the mayor who helped lobby approval to host the Olympics in 1996, which would grow the Atlanta homeless population by destroying public and low-cost housing. The city council and governor also approved of the construction of the Georgia Dome for the Atlanta Falcons after the team's owner threatened to move. The dome was projected to cost $210 million and would be placed in a poor black neighborhood. Young also renovated the closed underground Atlanta into a shopping destination. Many observers were pissed that the money did not go to social programs for the most vulnerable. Despite, or perhaps because of his prioritization of businesses, Andrew Young was re-elected in 1985 with over 80% of the city's vote, demonstrating his long-standing popularity and making him consider a run for governor after his two-term mayoral limit. In Detroit, Mayor Coleman Young had been elected in 1973, narrowly defeating a police commissioner. He hired more black cops in an attempt to integrate the police department, have residents patrolling their own communities, and to combat police brutality. Keep in mind that many black Americans saw hiring more black cops to police their own neighborhoods as an important policy win. And in Detroit, this seemed to work. Complaints against police fell from 2,323 in 1975 to 825 in 1982. Coleman Young also prioritized the revitalization of downtown, affirmative action, and attracting new job opportunities for the city's unemployed, of which black people were 25%. He also raised taxes a lot, reduced the city's workforce, and saw rising gang violence, drug use, and arsons.
More people under age 21 in Detroit have been shot in the first 10 months of 1986 than in all of 1985. More than 70 young people have been killed, a 10% increase from last year.
The drug trade has created new status symbols for Detroit youngsters. The beeper to stay in touch and the handgun to stay in control. Status symbols that are catching innocent bystanders in the crossfire.
He was sitting there playing cards and then boom. Bullets just started coming from everywhere.
Tanisha Baldwin was killed when 5 men opened fire on the wrong house. She was 8. Willie Brown was walking past the house that night when he was hit.
Young was politically strategic. Said historian Ken Coleman, Young's press secretaries were always white. He chose to keep the police commissioner of the previous mayor, who had formerly been an FBI agent, the very same agency that investigated Coleman Young for 40 years of his life. Young would serve a total of 5 terms, an impeccable feat for a man who traveled in leftist circles in the 40s and 50s and was even interrogated as a suspected communist before the McCarthy-era House Committee. Then there was the infamous Mayor Marion Barry of Washington, D.C., who was elected in 1978. Though his achievements have been overshadowed by mishandling the crack epidemic response and himself being exposed for smoking crack in 1990, he started out doing what he could in cash-strapped D.C. He created a youth summer job program, restored housing units, and kept many jobs for citizens when similar cities couldn't. While he got more minority-owned firms hired for city contracts, his administration gave contracts to his political connections and contributors worth around $856 million, inflating the cost of services in other sectors. And because Barry kept making city jobs to battle unemployment, his deficit swelled. His leadership only got worse with time. For the 1986 mayoral elections, he passed a law to get his only true potential competitor for a third term, Jesse Jackson, from running. When a national winter blizzard hit Washington, D.C. in 1987, Barry was in California, in town to see Super Bowl 21. D.C., bogged down in 14 inches of snow, was shut down for several days while Barry stayed to watch the Giants kick the Broncos' asses and see players dump a cooler of Gatorade over Bill Parcells' head. Oh, and Barry allegedly collapsed from cocaine use. To make matters worse, over the next 2 years, D.C. would earn the highest murder rate in the nation, with 369 and 434 homicides, respectively, in 88 and 89.
Approximately 33-year-old black male. He's been shot 3 times, that's shot 3 times.
It's like living in a war zone. You hear gunfire every night. We're scared.
The saying in Washington these days is that D.C. doesn't stand for District of Columbia, but for Dodge City.
All of us are appalled. We're agonizing about it. We don't like the fact that we had 372 murders last year.
It's as if the White House and the Capitol were positioned on the streets of the Old West. These dots are where the fatal gunfights took place in the last year, most of them related to the sale of drugs.
The severe limitations of black mayors made people realize that black mayors weren't enough. Some were even directly involved with violence against black people, like in the case of Philadelphia's first black mayor, Wilson Goode. Elected in 1983, he was the first mayor in American history to authorize the police department to bomb its own citizens 2 years later. MOVE was an organization that attempted to create its own communal oasis in the middle of the city, desiring a return to hunter-gathering and a rejection of modern science, medicine, and technology. MOVE's politics, though alienating and problematic and alleged to be abusive, demonstrated that there were groups of black people who attempted to live outside of conventional American norms as political resistance. Beginning in 1981, after MOVE moved to a row house in West Philadelphia, neighbors complained about trash, confrontations, and noise for about 4 years. Accusing the 7 adults raising the 6 children inside of illegal possession of firearms, parole violations, contempt of court, and more, Wilson Goode and the police commissioner labeled MOVE a terrorist organization. On May 13th, over 500 cops showed up to administer arrest warrants and remove the group from the property. After an armed standoff with police, who fired 10,000 rounds into the building, and a 90-minute gunfight that injured 1 officer, the mayor and the police commissioner ordered that the home be bombed. 11 of the 13 people inside, including 5 children, were killed. Many of their remains were mishandled and destroyed without notifying the families. The fire from the bomb spread to nearby properties, destroying approximately 65 of them. The surviving adult member, Ramona Africa, was charged and convicted on charges of riot and conspiracy, for which she would serve 7 years in prison. No city official, including Wilson Goode, was criminally charged. Goode would be re-elected, carried to victory by the same white liberals and middle-class black people who had been complaining about MOVE in the years leading up to the bombing. Frustrated with the establishment, more and more grassroots organizers became hyper-focused and cohesive, with interests ranging from voter registration to anti-drug activism to neighborhood cleanups. In my home state of North Carolina in 1982, activist Benjamin Chavis and Congressman Walter Fauntleroy led over 500 protesters against the dumping of toxic waste containing cancerous PCBs in a small, predominantly black town named Afton.
The signs and chants of the protesters made clear their opposition to having the toxic chemical buried in their county.
There ain't no stopping us now. There ain't no stopping us now.
I don't want this stuff thrown in my water.
We're marching because we do not want this to affect our future.
If you do not cease this unlawful act, you will be arrested.
The leaders of the protests said they would not move, and they were the first arrested. As they were being escorted away, the crowd moved in on the entrance. Many of the marchers then sat in the road, and the patrol began arresting them and placing them on a jail bus.
Though North Carolina did not change its plans to unleash hazardous material into a black community, Chavis would strike a new term: environmental racism. The protests and the new term would spark discourse and activism in the years to come. In Boston, the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative was founded in the mid-'80s by black people, whites, Latinos, and Cape Verdeans who went around cleaning up approximately 1,300 vacant lots and removing derelict vehicles. Malcolm X and his ideas saw a popular resurgence in the 1980s, mainly through rap artists, recorded speeches, posters, and reissued copies of his book. Malcolm's former group, the Nation of Islam, grew significantly in the 1980s, being especially popular for its anti-drug stances and emphasis on economic development. Apart from a 1984 endorsement of Jesse Jackson, the group mostly stayed out of electoral politics. When Jesse Jackson's anti-Semitic comment was revealed by black reporter Milton Coleman, Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan became nationally known when he said, "We're gonna punish the traitor. One day soon we will punish you with death." His other remarks, like Adolf Hitler was a great man and that Judaism was a gutter religion, made his anti-Semitism undeniably clear. It's important to note that while many white Americans hated Farrakhan for his awful anti-Semitic rhetoric, his race exacerbated that hatred. He seemed to be treated with more scorn than white anti-Semites, making seeing a small but solid group of Black Americans become protective of him. Plus, Farrakhan's conservative teachings about schooling, drugs, heterosexual relations, respectability, and the need for economic improvement and employment also did not sound crazy to more than a few Black Americans. His ideas sounded like an antidote to current problems. The Nation of Islam also won support with its drug patrols in the Fruit of Islam wing.
Police say this rundown apartment complex in inner city Washington is an open-air market for cocaine and crack. So when a local mosque of Louis Farrakhan's Nation of Islam offered to send its members to patrol against drug dealers, apartment dwellers agreed, even supplied keys so the Muslims could search apartments and examine people they felt didn't belong. The neighbors want the Muslims to continue their patrols, and police say the Muslims have the right, but have no right to use violence.
In a New York chapter, for instance, the imam visited with police and promised that his men would carry no weapons and exact no justice before calling officers to the one square block that they hoped to reclaim from the tyranny of crack sellers. The Nations and Fruit of Islam would eventually move into doing event security and personal bodyguarding. Black people were spending more time focusing on specific issues that matter to them and finding community in likewise thinkers. The tactics in those communities changed. For instance, Buppies who grew up participants of the protesting days of the Civil Rights Movement changed their tactics. Years ago, we picketed buildings because we didn't know who the owners were, and we didn't know how else to get our point across. Now we pick up the phone and call the owner and try to persuade him. If I don't know him, somebody I know does, said one Buppie in 1985. Said another, sure, I want my BMW, I want to live comfortably, but I want health care for poor Black people too. Like-minded Buppies started political action committees, created programs for their own communities, helped mentor aspiring college students through sororities and fraternities, and exercised what Jesse Jackson referred to as enlightened self-interest. Knowing the precariousness of Black success and wealth in a white supremacist world, Buppies organized to create their own nonpartisan old boy network. When criticized as Uncle Tom's, one Buppie challenged back in the Chicago Tribune, "It is for the sake of our young people, not the egos of my fellow Buppies, that I voice my concern. We see the evidence of Black failure all around us. Crime, illiteracy, teen pregnancy, the new urban underclass, declining Black college enrollment. Why do we not do more to encourage Black success?" Other Buppies joined the few longtime middle-class Black Republicans. Polls at the time revealed that while most Black people did not want to cut social programs, many were socially conservative towards the topic of abortion and when figuring out how to deal with crime. Deferring ideas about HIV, privatization, globalization, immigration, crime, labor, gender roles, and sexuality would further fracture the Black community and its political power. Drugs were also divisive. There were those who wanted to punish addicts and suppliers, those who didn't, and then an entirely separate argument about whether or not marijuana should be considered dangerous. Baltimore Mayor Kurt L. Shmoke, whose name is one of the funniest coincidences ever, was dragged when he advocated for the decriminalization of weed and other drugs in front of Congress in 1988. While some people saw the arrest of drug users as a problem, others saw it as a solution. Major things the community agreed was actually a problem was unemployment and poverty. In 1988, the Black poverty rate was 31.6% compared to 10.1% of white Americans. By 1990, the median income for Black Americans was 42% the median income for white families. But who was the cause of that unemployment and poverty? It depended on who you asked. Chairman of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Clarence Thomas, declared in 1984 that anti-apartheid activities were a waste of time for Black Americans and that affirmative action was unnecessary, giving him a bunch of neocon stands who would be loyal to him if he ever decided to, become Supreme Court Justice. Economist and writer Thomas Sowell also gained acclaim in the right wing for being anti-affirmative action and welfare, as well as refuting notions of white supremacy corrupting the Black community. Instead, blaming welfare's lack of effectiveness on the people who received it, rather than the strict restrictions and dire conditions legislators created. Thomas Sowell is and has always been mistaken. There were a plethora of issues within the world of employment and labor that compounded diminished welfare benefits. For instance, in 1989, Shoney's restaurant was sued for discrimination against its Black employees, constantly passing them up for promotions when they were able to get jobs, which was no easy feat. The company's founder was revealed in court documents to be known throughout the company for admonishing his restaurants to stop hiring Blacks. The restaurants, he would say, were too dark. Black men especially were barred from waiting tables. This underemployment problem was in every industry, which along with shitty paying jobs incentivized illegal activities. But we'll return to drugs and crime in a moment. First, the other major elephant in the room, the HIV/AIDS crisis. In 1988, the nation's first black nightly news anchor, Max Robinson, died of AIDS. In the time before his sudden death, the 49-year-old had made no mention about his diagnosis, and some activists were disappointed. Said one to the LA Times, "It would have been more powerful had Max Robinson been enlisted in the fight against AIDS when he was still alive, talking about himself as a person with AIDS." But in the black community, HIV/AIDS was still very much stigmatized, as well as a linchpin for conspiracy theories about black genocide, despite the damage it was doing. Keep in mind that revelations about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment had only come to light in 1972. Misinformation and apathy spread like the virus itself and was different everywhere. Recall that the racists in Forsyth County alleged black people would bring AIDS to the area, demonstrating how the virus stigma was now not just against gays. New data bolstered stigma against black people, documented Darius Boast. In 1987, the Washington Post reported that AIDS cases in Washington, D.C. were distinct from those in places like New York City, and that the majority were black homosexual and bisexual men. In the district, half of the 693 reported cases are black, while only 3% are Hispanic. But unlike New York City, where the vast majority of black and Hispanic victims are intravenous drug users or their sexual partners, 70% of black AIDS patients in the district are homosexual or bisexual men, according to statistics compiled by city health officials. In some gay circles in D.C., the belief was that HIV was a white disease caught from having sex with whites. Among straight circles, the common belief was that HIV was strictly for the gays. For the xenophobic, Haitians. Conspiracies about free condoms being purposely faulty abounded. Even still, there were black activists who sought to change the stigma around HIV/AIDS in the early days of fear, conspiracy theories, apathy, and denial. Rashida Hassan was a Philadelphia nurse who established Blacks Educating Blacks About Sexual Health Issues, or BABASHI, in 1985. Gay Men of African Descent, or GMAD, was founded in New York City in 1986. Reggie Williams, Steve Feeback, and Phil Wilson founded the National Task Force on AIDS Prevention to create preventative services for black gay men. They received a grant from the CDC for their work. The black and brown trans communities of urban centers were among the hardest hit by the HIV crisis due to their likelihood of homelessness, drug use, and survival sex work. Community organizers and survival sex workers like Marsha P. Johnson helped with memorials, did street activism in collaboration with groups like ACT UP, and visited with the sick and dying. Black gay nightclubs and ballroom scenes in D.C., Los Angeles, and other urban areas provided information, financial aid, and condoms to their communities. In 1989, noticing a gap in HIV discourse and prevention for black women, Dazone Dixon Diallo founded Sister Love, which went on to provide free HIV testing and reproductive health care with special interests for, quote, women who had been marginalized, including sex workers, incarcerated women, and women on welfare. While these early attempts at mitigating the spread and harm of HIV were crucial first steps, the homophobia and religiosity of the black community, along with the religiosity, homophobia, and inaction of the Reagan administration and its fiercest constituents, would help make HIV/AIDS an ongoing problem after the 80s ended. In 1988, for the first time, the number of new infections among black Americans exceeded the amount of infections in white Americans, an imbalance that has remained ever since.
Celtics select Len Bias of the University of Maryland. There he is, Len Bias.
In 1986, Maryland native Len Bias seemed to be on top of the world. The 22-year-old University of Maryland basketball player was being compared to Michael Jordan and had collected his second ACC Player of the Year award. On June 17th, he was selected by the Boston Celtics as the second overall pick in the NBA draft. He was already in negotiations to accept a $1.6 million endorsement deal with Reebok.
What do you think your potential is?
Well, I think I need to improve more on my ball handling and my all-around play, but I think vastly I need to improve on my ball handling and just keep working on my game.
Well, you said you wanted to play basketball, model clothes, and do some interior design, and you're going to have plenty of time to do that and probably plenty of money. And to find out more about that, let's go up to Red Auerbach now in Boston.
By Juneteenth, he would be dead of a cocaine overdose.
Please help as soon as you can. It's no
Come on, you can hear it now. This is Len Bias. You have to get her back to life. There's no way he can die. Seriously, sir. Please come quick.
Bias died of cocaine intoxication, which interrupted the normal electrical activity of his brain, which controlled his heartbeat. This resulted in the sudden onset of seizures and cardiac arrest.
His drug overdose, though high profile, was just one of many affecting the black community in the 80s. Bias's parents were dealt another blow when in 1990, the second of their 4 children, Jay, was killed in a drive-by shooting. The grief of these parents would motivate them to participate in anti-drug and gun control policy discussions, symbolizing 2 major concerns for the black community at large in the late 80s. Crack use was a raging problem nationwide, wrapped up in wealth inequality, unemployment, and refusal to treat drug addiction as a disease rather than a criminal act. Plus, other social issues made the lure of easy drug dealing money or cheap self-medicating alluring. Excellent books like Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow delve into the systemic way the crack epidemic was weaponized by politicians to jail the population, often at a profit. But there's more to the story.
Some local politicians are asking for federal military help.
The National Guard could bring in persons or military police in jeeps and patrol those areas where we know they're heavily fortified and insist that they turn in those guns.
The city has declared a crime emergency. It is planning to shift 450 officers from the wealthier districts where crime is low to the tougher sections where murders are high. As part of the shift, the police chief is expected to move some officers from desk jobs to street patrols 1 day a week.
It wasn't just white people pushing for the criminalization of drug pushers and users, and this was something that had been evolving for a few decades. In 1979, Ebony magazine had dedicated an issue to detailing black people's growing alarm at the harm being perpetuated by their own in their own communities, discussing the term black-on-black crime, which they predicted would be a big problem in the following decade if nothing was done. They listed the causes as hard drugs, an inadequate prison system, racism, TV, and movies, and a lack of morality. A number of cures were presented, including a return to religious morality and correcting economic justice, the latter put forth by Congressman John Conyers. Winston E. Moore, however, the chief of security for Chicago's housing projects and the first black warden of a Cook County jail, wrote a popular piece saying, "It is my conviction that we will never put an end to the mounting problem of black-on-black crime until we stop coddling the hoodlums." Not only are these criminals allowed to prey on their law-abiding brothers and sisters with virtual impunity, they have attained bona fide hero status among many young blacks. He called for severe crackdowns on drug pushers while pointing out that the fastest growing crime in the black community was rape, of which nothing was being done because of stereotypes about black women. And only 1 year later, in another editorial, he would blame black mothers for homosexuality, rape, and femicide. Atlanta's chief of police, George Napper, who was demanding community accountability, wrote, "On too many occasions, friends have told me that they have gone out of their way to say corrective words to a 9 or 10-year-old youngster, only to be cussed out. Further, when reporting the incident to the child's mother or father, more obscenities were forthcoming. Obviously, and unfortunately, the next time the youngster is involved in a similar situation, there will be tendency to call the police and have them deal with it. Too many of our kids that can be controlled in the neighborhood end up being treated or mistreated by the criminal justice system." This quote demonstrates that while many black Americans acknowledge the damage and violence of the American legal system, the growing disconnect from community and shared racial values in the face of rising crime made calling cops on each other a bit easier, especially if you had witnessed or been a victim of a crime. Numerous Ebony subscribers wrote into the magazine agreeing with Winston Moore's demands to stop coddling the hoodlums. Remember Charles Murray from the last episode? From Thomas Sowell to Winston Moore, Murray's 1984 assessment that welfare and soft crime approaches were the true causes of problems in the black community, rather than white supremacy and wealth inequality, were similarly being made by some in the black community. At the time, prison abolition, drug decriminalization, and other now familiar yet still divisive ideas were on the fringes and most often being promoted by 2 groups that moderate black Americans rejected and still reject as much as they did white supremacists: black radicals and white liberals. In the black community, drugs were equated with slavery and the KKK. KKK. For some, seen as the racial battle of the times. Said Jesse Jackson, "No one has the right to kill our children. I won't take it from the Klan with a rope. I won't take it from a neighbor with dope." Drug dealers, for many black people, were race traders. Modern notions of non-violent drug offenses were a foreign concept to the people of the 1980s who were undaunted with violence on a daily basis. For many, crime and drugs were glued together. It would be an extreme disservice to anyone watching this video on the black experience in the 1980s to not have a full and objective view at crime and black responses to it. For many black Americans living through the frequent violence and despair, the crack epidemic and the resulting crimes could not be shouldered by white supremacy and wealth inequality alone. Likewise, mass incarceration caused irreversible damage to the community, but its existence cannot be fully blamed on white supremacy alone. It's ahistorical to pretend that black people were passive participants in the creation of mass incarceration and that significant violent crimes, especially against women, just weren't happening or that they were overblown. In 1980, black people accounted for 44% of arrests for violent crimes and nearly 30% of arrests for property crimes, despite being only 12% of the population. Most of the crimes were intraracial against members of their own community because of proximity and the likelihood of police apathy for black victims. During the decade, 62% of all drug-related homicides involved black victims. Thousands died and thousands more were injured or maimed by direct or stray bullets. The Federal Bureau of Justice Statistics calculated, based on crime victimization rates from 1975 to 1984, the lifetime chances of being raped, robbed, or assaulted. They found that if things kept going the way they were, 83% of all Americans aged 12 and up would be victims of some sort of attempted or completed violent crime. There were nightly news reports of gang killings, robberies, and crack cocaine-related arrests. The public also zeroed in on crack babies and their mothers, which we'll come back to in episode 5. Numerous black authors and artists documented the raw grittiness of the streets of 1980s New York, Chicago, and LA. In LA alone, the number of annual gang-related homicides would rise from 212 in 1984 to 771 in 1991, the same year that the screenplay John Singleton wrote in the late 80s premiered to critical acclaim. Another important fact about gang violence in the 80s was the new prevalence of high-powered military-grade weapons, which came with the international drug connections.
The drug money has turned street gangs into small armies.
We have semi-automatic and full automatic machine guns.
But there is nothing traditional about the firepower now being used. This car was riddled 40 times in a gun battle. The weapons were AK-47s like this one, the favorite assault rifle of many of the world's armies.
More guns on the streets meant that non-drug-related disputes could and did escalate from simple disagreements to shots being fired. Other important violence to note is the rape and sexual assault of the era, which we have way less official numbers on because only roughly 3% of women reported such crimes and way less men. In retrospect, we know the general permissiveness of rape culture in the black community, like modern revelations about the rapist Bill Cosby, or the retrospective views of threats and stories of rape documented in numerous rap songs of the period. In Monster, the autobiography of a gang member, the bulk of the violence Sanyika Shakur, aka Cody Scott, discussed was black men attempting to kill each other and hurting civilians in the process in 1980s South Central LA. But women inside and outside of the gangs were raped with impunity, with certain sets like a group of Hoovers being known for gang rapes. Of course, rape or violence against women was not just a gang thing. More concretely, we know the homicide rate of black women hovered around 43% during the decade. As crime in black communities grew, so did black attempts at mitigating it, and this includes those asking for harsher punishments after all the violence they saw and experienced. They weren't brainwashed, they were scared. A 1982 essay in The Atlantic titled Broken Windows, the Police and Neighborhood Safety, written by two white professors, argued that police could reduce major crimes by focusing on little shit, like panhandling, loitering, graffiti, public urination, and other largely victimless public nuisances. The broken windows theory appealed to police chiefs and mayors across the country. Future mayoral hopefuls like prosecutor Rudy Giuliani would make this ideology a core part of their platforms. Plus, cleaning up crime attracted businesses, taxes, and jobs. This was the case in New York, where battling graffiti was the key symbolic problem. For fearful constituents who were terrorized by gun violence in conjunction with the rise of drugs, supporting broken window policies and harsh drug crackdowns would be a no-brainer. In Locking Up Our Own, Crime and Punishment in Black America, James Foreman Jr. detailed how black communities supported eventual mass incarceration. The same year that the Broken Windows article dropped, DC was set to vote on Initiative 9, which would legalize mandatory minimum sentencing, 6 years after DC had enacted the strictest gun control laws in the country. The initiative was supported by the NRA and opposed by, quote, major civil rights groups, civil liberties organizations, and a citizens coalition called Citizens for Sensible Sentencing. Even still, 73% of the city's voters, many of them in poor black neighborhoods, approved of Initiative 9, which gave 5 to 10 year minimum sentences for firearm crimes. In 1986, DC launched Operation Clean Sweep. The anti-drug initiative gave officers the power to, quote, clear corners, establish roadblocks, make undercover purchases, seize cars, and condemn apartments. The program, which largely targeted small-scale dealers and users rather than kingpins, had the support of black voters who were not thinking about the long-term limited voting, employment, education, and housing opportunities of those arrested. The Washington Afro newspaper voiced its support, calling drugs a threat to our race. In the first 18 months of the program, police made 46,000 arrests, or 1 for every 14 DC residents. Marion Barry, who as a city council member back in 1975 voted to decriminalize marijuana, said of Operation Clean Sweep, if you are caught with half a gram of cocaine, we will take away your car. If you are caught with 1 marijuana joint, we want your car. Despite the seizing of cars of drug purchasers, DC's homicide rate exploded in 1988, prompting City Council member Nadine Winter to implore Reagan to declare a state of emergency and deploy the National Guard. In 1987, Los Angeles initiated Project Hammer, in which law enforcement led destructive raids and arrested black and brown people because they looked like gang members. And one weekend, 1,453 people were detained. By 1990, over 50,000 people had been arrested in raids, with more black men and women arrested than in any period since the Watts riots of 1965. Many were never charged with anything. In one neighborhood, wrote the LA Times, the police smashed furniture, punched holes in walls, destroyed family photos, ripped down cabinet doors, slashed sofas, shattered mirrors, hammered toilets to porcelain shards, doused clothing with bleach, and emptied refrigerators. Some officers left their own graffiti. LAPD rules, rolling 30s, die. What did this particular raid yield? Less than 6 ounces of marijuana and less than an ounce of cocaine. Some black people upset with the constant gang violence rejoiced at the raids, as long as they weren't one of the many innocent people swept up in the raids or police brutality. Others were conflicted or downright alarmed. Wrote ACLU lawyer Gary Williams, I do not want to see the hammer fall if the tactics employed include the indiscriminate detention and railroaded arrest of black youngsters because they look like gang members or because they happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But dauntless media coverage of crime, which we'll take a look at later in episode 6, fused with real experiences of crime. In 1989, when 22-year-old crack dealer Richard Winrow became the first Californian and the second American sentenced to life in prison without a chance of parole, the man who slammed the gavel was a 79-year-old black judge named David W. Williams. Winrow told reporters, I'm being used as a guinea pig for the war on drugs. Said Assistant U.S. Attorney John Gordon at the time, the poor schmuck just happened to be unlucky that he is the first one. Referring to the new law Reagan had signed in 1988 that mandated mandatory minimum sentencing for crack and gave people convicted of crack possession 3 times life in prison without the possibility of parole. Congress had also increased sentence minimums in 1984 and 1986, never calling public hearings or getting expert testimony on proposed legislation. The 1988 law created a 100-to-1 sentencing disparity between powder and crack, the latter widely associated with and used by black people. Other war on drugs policies intensified, like a fresh infusion of cash for state and local police who militarized their forces, seized property, and assaulted with impunity. The voices of those who knew this wasn't going to end well were drowned out, like Kurt L. Shmoke. In LA, where crack wars between gangs was rampant, the regional director for the Community Gang Services, Charles Norman, said that only a renewed program of jobs and community-based recreation activities could persuade a majority of gang members to reform. He went on to say, you can't just suppress people who don't have any hope. I welcome new law enforcement, but there have to be alternatives.
And night after night, there are bodies, as the gangs who control the drug trade fight over territory. Across the country, hundreds are killed or wounded every week in gang-related shootings. Many innocent people who just happen to get in the way.
I just want to know why, why my child? What was...
Her 15-year-old daughter was killed.
You tell me where I can go to live in peace and peace of mind, then I will go. But there's nowhere that's safe in the city of Los Angeles.
In 1983, a year before the Bernhard Goetz incident, only 2% of New York's felony complaints resulted in jailed offenders. Goetz himself had been robbed by 3 men in 1981. Daryl KB, who had admitted to his group's intentions to rob Goetz that night, had participated in the armed robbery of 3 men just 2 months before the infamous shooting. It's no wonder Goetz had support from some black New Yorkers. The people who agreed with Goetz's decision to draw his gun would be many of the same people desiring a solution to crime through arrests and punishment into the 90s. But cases like the Central Park 5, a 1989 event in which 4 black teenagers and 1 Latino teen were coerced into confessing to a rape they did not commit and subsequently imprisoned, showed that the justice system was fundamentally flawed and often unreliable. And by 1990, there were 130 black police chiefs nationwide in DC, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Detroit, Chicago, and Houston. In 1990 Atlanta, new police chief Eldrin Bell made his stance clear on drug dealers, saying, unless we arrest them, incarcerate them, and spit them back out with only their underwear, they beat the system. Of course, discourse about drugs and policing and what prison should even do would continue into the 90s as the black middle class fled from urban areas to suburbs and the Sun Belt in droves. It was around this time that some black leaders were beginning to question harsh mandatory sentencing and the police raids sweeping their communities. Not loudly, but they were beginning to think about it. From harsh sentencing sprung new issues like the increase in drug dealers employing children who didn't get mandatory minimum sentencing. Families were ripped apart when people were sent to prison. Meanwhile, some leaders worried about the war on drugs strictly in financial terms. In New York, summarized Deborah Peterson Small, the increasing population in prison worked to the benefit of upstate politicians and to the detriment of New York City politicians because the resources, the dollars from the state, followed the prisoners up there, and it meant money that was leaving the community, not just people. Black expression, while always important in our history, reached new heights in this decade. Octavia E. Butler's Kindred, though released in 1979, was a popular choice during the 80s, disrupting the largely white science fiction genre. Mixing time travel with slave narratives, the book was written after Butler heard a young black nationalist express his desire to murder his ancestors who had been subservient during slavery. Kindred explored how the silent survival of the enslaved was an act of resistance in itself. Alice Walker's The Color Purple made a splash in 1982, tackling the widespread and long-reaching existence of sexual and physical abuse of black women and girls, as well as black same-sex desire. A movie, directed by Steven Spielberg, would be released to controversy and acclaim in 1985. 2 years later, Toni Morrison published her most popular novel, Beloved, which handled themes of black women's bodily autonomy, enslavement, and womanhood in a white supremacist society.
Get up, asshole!
Get up! Get the fuck up!
Let's get him out of here.
In 1989, Spike Lee released his second and most popular film, Do the Right Thing, just 1 month before the murder of Yusuf Hawkins. Dealing with themes of modern-day race relations and police brutality, the film was critically acclaimed by some like Roger Ebert and labeled as potentially dangerous by others. One reviewer claimed that the film might make black audiences prone to rioting, which would make Lee later say, "I don't remember people saying people were going to come out of theaters killing people after they watched Arnold Schwarzenegger films." While the mainstream celebs mentioned at the top of this episode tended to shy away from aggressive conversations and critiques of race, there was a growing group of vocal creatives who challenged the status quo. Public Enemy became known as the Black Panthers of rap and notably caused wider interest in the anti-apartheid movement, the Nation of Islam, and facets of black history like the Black Panthers and Malcolm X. And after Arizona abolished MLK Day in 1987, Public Enemy released When I Get to Arizona, which, while sparking controversy, also reignited debates over the contentious federal holiday.
Everybody has the right in this country to express their particular point of view, And that's what we're doing as a hardcore radical hip-hop group.
The most infamous rap group was Niggas with Attitudes, or NWA, who became internationally known when it released Fuck the Police on its debut album Straight Outta Compton in 1988. The entire album involved themes of police brutality, violence on the streets of South Central LA, and misogyny, pioneering the emergence of gangsta rap, which the group called reality rap. Cops found Fuck the Police so offensive that across the country, police departments refused to provide security for NWA's concerts, damaging their plans to tour but increasing the group's publicity. The group's popularity, especially among young white teens who weren't from the hood, would be a crucial component of the culture wars we'll discuss in the next episode. The same year that Fuck the Police debuted, two other important things happened. First, Yo MTV Raps premiered on MTV to a captivated, largely suburban white audience. Secondly, presidential candidate George H.W. Bush would make a black man named Willie Horton a key figure of his campaign, something we'll come back to later in the series.
Yeah, but you know in your heart of hearts, and we're going to take a break for a commercial, you know that that's a lot of baloney. I mean, there are a lot of black players, there are a lot of great black baseball men who would dearly love to be in managerial positions. And I guess what I'm really asking you is to, peel it away a little bit. Just tell me, why do you think it is? Is there still that much prejudice in baseball today?
No, I don't believe it's prejudice. I truly believe that they may not have some of the necessities to be, let's say, a field manager or perhaps a general manager. Why are black men or black people not good swimmers? Because they don't have the buoyancy.
Oh, it may just be that they don't have access to all the country clubs and the pools. But I'll tell you what, let's take a break and we'll continue our discussion in a moment.
That was Ted Koppel in 1987 during an interview with Los Angeles Dodgers general manager Al Campanis. Within 48 hours, Campanis was fired from his position. It's hard to imagine his comments leading to a firing in 1967 or even 1977. In the 80s, though, things were changing, especially for businesses who needed to rely on black dollars. But in the world of politics, class issues were being downplayed in pursuit of positive representations and black excellence. An ongoing problem since the 1960s civil rights movement, wrote Susan Anderson in her 1989 essay, Eyes on the Prizes, Not the People. The legal and statutory standards that were won by the Black freedom movement, as besieged as they are today, are the result of a profound compromise by mainstream black leaders who withheld any deeper criticism of the economic structure of the nation as long as blacks were equally represented in it. Representation, however, pertained only to qualified blacks. That compromise, with all its class bias, is the hidden reality in black politics today. If there is a black political crisis, it is to be found in the conflict between continued inequality for the black poor and traditional black political concerns. This quote would resonate into the 90s and still resonates now. The black community made a lot of undeniable gains in the 80s, as represented by celebs, Buppies, and successful litigation. But the undeniable systemic losses of the poor would blunt long-term progress and further divide an already divided community, exposing the ideological chasms that were once more easily obscured in the 60s and 70s. And ultimately, what did the amalgamation of real violent crimes, drug abuse, fear, and a rejection of liberalism in Reagan's America lead to? The support of punitive legislation by some members of the black community, as well as the elevation of the war on drugs and mass incarceration. Because punishment was prioritized over understanding drug addiction as a disease, it also led to the continued dehumanization of people who used crack, with crackhead becoming a pejorative slang word that still hasn't gone out of style. Long after it was revealed that Reagan's administration had engineered the war on drugs as well as the distribution of drugs. And the existence of a song called Fuck the Police, though unique in its lyrics, was not unique in that it was a piece of art that scared white people, particularly white parents. But rap music, though embraced by many black Americans, was also rejected by conservative black people in large numbers who were fed up with crime and what they viewed as a lack of accountability, symbolizing a sharp cultural divide that undoubtedly trickled over into politics. In the next episode of Lexual Does the 80s, It's all about the kids. That's right, we'll be discussing culture wars and growing up in Reagan's America. If you're loving Lexual Does the 80s and want to be listed in the credits, please subscribe to my Patreon at the $25 and up level. You can also get sources and further reading there for just $1 below. The link is in the description box below.